The U.S. economy depends on migrant labor, yet worker shortages are causing rising costs and stalled industries. Eagle Discovery explores how America risks slowing down without those who sustain its prosperity. Economic reliance and the struggle for visibility. Despite certain narratives suggesting that immigrants are responsible for crime or job displacement in the U.S., statistical data and real-world economic trends tell a very different story. Research indicates that if more than 11 million undocumented immigrants were to be deported, the American workforce would shrink by approximately 5%, causing serious disruptions in crucial industries. The financial repercussions would be equally staggering, with the U.S. economy losing close to $100 billion in tax revenue at both state and federal levels. This is far from a theoretical issue. Many undocumented individuals, despite their lack of legal status, still contribute to the tax system. They often pay indirect taxes through everyday purchases, and in some cases even file taxes using individual taxpayer identification numbers, ITINs. A significant number of these migrants have lived in the U.S. for over a decade, establishing deep roots in their communities. They have families, own homes, and actively participate in local economies. Yet, their daily lives are overshadowed by the constant fear of detention and deportation, making them hesitant to interact with authorities, whether it be law enforcement or government agencies. This climate of fear has direct economic consequences. Many industries, including landscaping, construction, and agriculture, struggle to maintain a stable workforce. Labor shortages increase costs and delay projects, while the hospitality sector faces similar setbacks. Restaurants experience longer wait times due to the lack of kitchen staff, servers, and cleaning crews, resulting in higher prices for customers and a decline in business efficiency. What happens when a global economic giant suddenly loses its backbone? Agriculture slows down, construction projects stall, and the service industry struggles to meet demand, all of which create a ripple effect throughout the economy. From abandoned fields to soaring grocery bills. One of the most immediate and visible consequences of this labor disruption is in agriculture. In states like California, Texas, and Florida, migrant workers, primarily from Latin America, make up a substantial portion of the farming workforce. Without them, fields are left unattended, crops go unharvested, and food production grinds to a halt. The result? A sharp increase in food prices. American consumers quickly feel the impact in their grocery bills. Everyday staples such as tomatoes, lettuce, onions, and eggs become more expensive. The fundamental principle of supply and demand comes into play. When production decreases, prices inevitably rise. Despite claims that increasing wages or offering jobs to U.S. citizens could solve the issue, the reality is far more complex. Agricultural labor is physically demanding, requires long hours under harsh conditions, and often offers wages that are dictated by the competitive nature of the market. Most American workers are unwilling to take on these roles, while migrant laborers, who have historically sustained the industry, depend on them for survival. A sudden disruption in this workforce doesn't just affect farms. It sends shockwaves through the entire economy, triggering inflation and making basic necessities less affordable for everyone. If these labor shortages persist, the nation may face an unexpected crisis, one where entire industries falter, economic growth slows, and the cost of living rises across the board. The construction sector grapples with a growing labor crisis. First-hand accounts from industry insiders paint a troubling picture. Construction projects abandoned overnight as workers, fearing immigration raids, simply don't return to job sites. The backbone of residential and commercial construction, whether it's building new homes, performing essential maintenance, or installing roofs, is heavily reliant on migrant labor. However, the looming threat of detention has made daily work a gamble for many, forcing companies into a difficult position as they struggle to find replacements for skilled workers with years of experience handling heavy machinery and physically demanding tasks. The economic fallout from these disruptions extends far beyond individual companies. Every stalled or unfinished project results in financial losses, not just for construction firms, but also for the vast network of suppliers, logistics providers, and contractors that fuel the industry. The ripple effects are particularly severe in real estate, where construction delays and rising labor costs further exacerbate the already high cost of housing. Urban centers, where demand for housing is already outpacing supply, are hit the hardest. Longer project timelines mean fewer available homes, contributing to skyrocketing rental prices and mortgage rates. This cascading effect fuels inflation, making homeownership increasingly unattainable, not just for lower-income families, but also for middle-class Americans who now find themselves struggling to buy or even afford rent in competitive markets. The hospitality industry feels the absence of migrant workers. The U.S. hospitality industry, encompassing restaurants, hotels, bars, and cafes, has also been severely impacted by the dwindling migrant workforce. From the bustling streets of New York to the sunny coasts of California, hospitality businesses rely heavily on immigrant workers to fill crucial roles in kitchens, housekeeping, and maintenance. However, the widespread fear of immigration raids has led many employees to stay away from work, leaving establishments desperately short-staffed. The consequences are glaring. Restaurants, despite having eager customers, are forced to leave tables empty, not because of a lack of demand, but because there aren't enough servers or kitchen staff to keep up with operations. Hotels experience prolonged room turnover times, delaying check-ins and frustrating guests. Bars and cafes, struggling to maintain sufficient staff, cut back on service hours, limiting their ability to generate revenue. As these shortages persist, businesses in the hospitality sector face tough decisions: either increase wages to attract local workers, which translates into higher prices for customers, or reduce services, ultimately diminishing the overall experience for consumers. In either case, the economy takes a hit, and both businesses and customers bear the burden. The contradiction of anti-immigrant policies. During the 2016 U.S. presidential election cycle that propelled Donald Trump into office, anti-immigrant rhetoric played a central role in shaping political discourse. Many supporters of strict immigration policies believed that undocumented migrants were a primary cause of job losses and rising crime rates. However, years of research and economic analysis have shown that these assumptions do not align with reality. Numerous studies have found no significant link between immigration and crime rates. In fact, in many immigrant-dense communities, crime levels have remained steady or even declined over the years. Meanwhile, the argument that migrants take jobs away from American workers fails to consider key economic dynamics. Many of the jobs filled by undocumented workers, especially in agriculture, construction, and service industries, are positions that American-born workers are largely unwilling to take due to the physically demanding nature of the work, long hours, seasonality, and relatively low wages. Ironically, some of the regions that voted most strongly in favor of restrictive immigration policies, particularly in agricultural and industrial areas, are now facing labor shortages and escalating costs. Farmers in states like Texas, Florida, and California are struggling to find enough workers to harvest crops, while construction companies are delaying projects due to a lack of skilled labor. The unintended consequence of these anti-immigrant policies is a workforce crisis that directly impacts local economies, driving up prices and slowing down business operations. On a broader scale, this contradiction becomes even more apparent. The U.S. economy is deeply reliant on its workforce to sustain production, growth, and competitiveness. Attempting to remove millions of undocumented laborers would not only create an immediate economic shock, but would also disrupt industries that are fundamental to daily American life. A country cannot simultaneously depend on a labor force to maintain its economic momentum while actively seeking to expel the very people who sustain it. The devastating impact of mass deportation. If the proposal to deport over 11 million undocumented migrants were executed, the consequences would be widespread and severe, touching nearly every sector of the economy and society. The immediate effects would include a 5% reduction in the workforce, leading to severe labor shortages in agriculture, construction, hospitality, and manufacturing. With fewer workers available to meet demand, businesses would struggle to maintain operations, causing delays, decreased productivity, and an overall economic downturn that could push the country toward recession. An estimated $97 billion loss in tax revenue, significantly affecting federal and state budgets. Despite lacking legal status, many undocumented immigrants contribute billions in taxes through payroll deductions, property taxes, sales taxes, and tax identification numbers, ITINs. Without this revenue, public services such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure would suffer drastic funding cuts. The collapse of key industries that heavily rely on migrant labor. Without farm workers, agricultural production would decline, leading to food shortages and higher grocery prices. The construction industry would see increased costs and project delays, exacerbating the housing crisis in urban areas. The hospitality and service industries, already struggling with labor shortages, would be further crippled, forcing restaurants, hotels, and bars to reduce services or shut down entirely. A surge in consumer prices, making everything from fresh produce to manufactured goods more expensive. Labor shortages would lead to supply chain disruptions, limiting the availability of essential products. As businesses raise wages to attract a shrinking workforce, those costs would be passed on to consumers, fueling inflation and making everyday goods less affordable for millions of Americans. Profound social and humanitarian consequences, with families torn apart as parents are deported, while their U.S.-born children remain in the country. The psychological toll on children left behind would be devastating, leading to increased poverty, instability, and long-term negative effects on their development. Moreover, racial and ethnic tensions would deepen as communities that have long integrated immigrant populations face disruption and division. The human toll of political rhetoric. While economic statistics provide a clear picture of the issue, it is essential to remember that behind each number is a real person, someone with hopes, obligations, and loved ones depending on them. Every day, countless migrants risk their freedom, not out of choice, but out of necessity. They leave behind countries plagued by violence, poverty, and instability, hoping to carve out a better future for themselves and their families through sheer hard work in the United States. For many, the decision to migrate is not just about economic opportunity, it is about survival. In their home countries, gang violence, political corruption, and extreme poverty leave them with little choice but to seek refuge elsewhere. Many embark on treacherous journeys, facing unimaginable hardships along the way. From crossing deserts under brutal conditions to encountering human traffickers, corrupt officials, and life-threatening dangers. Yet they press forward, driven by the fundamental desire to secure a safer and more stable life for their children. However, upon arrival in the U.S., they are met with an environment that, while dependent on their labor, increasingly seeks to criminalize and exclude them. The paradox is glaring. The American economy relies heavily on their contributions, yet they are denied basic rights, fair wages, and legal protections. Rather than being acknowledged for the essential roles they play in agriculture, construction, and the service sector, they are often scapegoated for economic and social issues, forced to live in the shadows under constant fear of detention and deportation. The economic impact of migrant labor shortages is not speculation. It is a reality that affects industries across the U.S. Mass deportations and restrictive policies do not just harm immigrant communities, they weaken the entire economy. Every time a migrant worker stays home out of fear, businesses struggle, productivity declines, and prices rise. Without them, farms lack workers, construction projects stall, and restaurants operate below capacity. This leads to higher costs for consumers and economic instability that affects all Americans, regardless of their stance on immigration. For the U.S. to sustain its economic strength and growth, it must recognize that migrant labor is not a burden, but an essential force driving the nation forward. Exclusion weakens, but inclusion strengthens. The choice is clear. America cannot truly thrive without those who help build it every day.